So the title of today's session is called Consultants Unplugged, and I'm so grateful to have both Hannah and Frank here with us. We're going to speak to the challenges and the successes that we've seen as consultants. But what we have to share, I really want to emphasize this, is really relevant to anyone in any role. Consultants have the advantage of working with many different clients on different kinds of projects. So they build a lot of wisdom and insight that spans different companies, different industries, different types of projects, big successes, big failures, kind of all of the above. So together, the other cool thing about this particular group is we cover three different three different continents. So Frank is in the UK and Hannah is in New Zealand. We're like all over the place. The time zones are off the charts. So I'm super excited. And I know that whether or not you are a consultant, you're going to benefit from the perspectives that they have to share. So lots of shares in the chat of where you're from. So great. We've got people from all over the world, just like we are here. And I would just like to kind of get us started by getting to know a little bit more about Frank and Hannah and their backgrounds. And just a little bit about, where they are in their role and what kind of roles they're filling today, or what kind of they're bringing in terms of their career backgrounds. So, Hannah, do you want to get us started?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Welcome. Hi, my name is Hannah. I'm from New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand, so down under. So I'm the morning person in the school.
It's like 8 a.m. for you or something?
Yes.
Yeah.
So bright and early. Yes, I'm a business analyst. I've been contracting and doing increasingly more kind of consulting work around based in Wellington, the capital city of New Zealand, and just contracts, big projects, whatever is interesting with people and helping people get stuff done in a good way. That was a weird intro, but that's what I've got.
No worries. All kinds of, so mostly business analysis work. I know we've talked about that before, and local to your, like, in the city that you're in. Yeah. Very cool. All right. How about you, Frank?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm not sure I deserve the title of consultant, really. I feel a bit like a phony consultant, only because it's never what I intended to set out to be. Like, for the first 12 years of my working life, I was a software engineer. I wrote .NET through and through, web development. And kind of what happened is I was from down under and I moved to England, but somewhere around that time I became really disillusioned with being a developer. I felt like I was just shoved in the corner and just fed rubbish, and I couldn't understand why projects didn't work. And so for a long period of time I trained as a project manager, trained as a business analyst, and I did that exclusively thinking I could try and fix things for the better. And kind of by exclusively working on projects, which I've always worked on, I have consulted, but never through like a big EY or PwC, always off my own back. And so it's a bit of a potted history, I guess, as a consulting engineer who never set out to do it. But yeah, 20 years worth of doing this now.
So 20 years of consulting without the intent of consulting.
Yeah, still. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I've come to it sideways as well. Like this is not a plan. Didn't do the EY Big Four consulting thing.
Right. And I guess I use the word consultant, not just like the big consulting company consultant, but somebody who goes in, and we were talking about this a bit in the beginning of, goes in, tackles a problem, and then is ready to move on to the next problem, versus kind of in that permanent role within an organization. So you're bringing a lot of outside expertise. You're in for usually a temporary point of time. So is that kind of how it? I feel like both of you have that kind of background.
Yes, that definitely describes me. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Awesome.
I think also, Laura, on that
Frank.
point. Yeah. On that point, I think what happened is maybe a certain number of years into this temporary working, what happened is the kind of looking inside so many different projects, you accumulate an experience where you start to think, oh, maybe I should do this more than just doing it temporary while I'm waiting for this thing to come along. So I think somewhere in my career, I started to see the breadth of experience actually being, advantageous over amongst someone who sits in a job for 5 or 10 years and changes 4 or 5 times in their career. You just don't get the same insight. That's all.
Yeah. And I'll just share a little bit about myself as well. So I am hosting this on the panel. I'm super excited to have both of you here. And also, I would encourage you both to, or anybody listening, to follow them on LinkedIn. They both share all kinds of amazing content on a very regular basis. And there's not a lot of people who do that consistently on LinkedIn in the business analysis space. And, my background is currently in business analysis training. And as I was starting Bridging the Gap as a training company after I had left corporate, I also did a bit of consulting or contracting, it was always a mix of the two. Like sometimes I was a contractor, sometimes I was finding my own client. And then like it morphed into training, which is its own type of consulting in a way when we work with a private client. So, I'll kind of intersperse some of those experiences as we go through this as well. And Eric asked a question right off the bat. Are you in business for yourselves or do you work for someone? So why don't we tackle that as part of the background, and then we'll dig into kind of the first set of topics that we wanted to talk to today. Hannah, would you consider yourself in business for yourself or working for someone or somewhere in between?
Business. So like I do have a small company that I do like contract out, and I try to avoid the because I think I'm at this point I'm an odd shaped BA role. So to plug me in is kind of odd. So I try to go direct, so not through a recruiter. I also just I like that a lot more because I mean that I can reflect my integrity, personal integrity and professional integrity to the client directly. I'm not having to do any filters. I'm not serving two masters at any point. Like I'm just got a direct thing.
Yeah.
So yes, but just in like a very small Hannah way.
And you, Frank?
I'm a pretty bad long-term employee because I always like a good level of control over my work. I like working in a team. I'm very collaborative, and I enjoy the company. It's probably many years later when I got my autism diagnosis, it kind of makes sense. But so I've always worked for myself because of that level of control I want. However, some engagements are 3 years, some engagements are 6 weeks. Some are retained on a monthly basis, 2 days a month over multiple years, and some of them all go alongside each other. So I'm in business, but there's this kind of weird thing where some of them you feel like an employee after a while, and other things are always just like in and out pretty much.
Yeah. There's definitely a mix of the ways that those things can work. All right. Thank you. So we wanted to talk about starting from some of the challenges. And I know, you've seen so many different things working inside of different kinds of projects, different organizations. Like, what are some of the themes that you've seen consistently when it comes to challenges that our organizations are facing around software projects? Frank, do you want to get us started there?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes wonder how good a BA I am, or am I still an engineer with some analysis skills tacked on? But fundamentally, or whether it's just the autism or being an engineer, I don't know. But I can't help but see the kind of if my software is my background, business analysis within a software context. I'm not doing generic type business analysis, but within that context, the thing that creates value is shipping code. And shipping code is like binary files, whether you're basically deploying them to a cloud-based instance or whether you're putting on someone's phone, or you create the object files and you ship them somewhere and someone uses it. Like that's the kind of, I can't get my head out of that. So if you're not doing that, then you're not creating value. And so a lot of projects I've been in is there's this kind of the good ones are, okay, we'll do a 3-month discovery process. And we kind of do a whole bunch of stuff and we discover some things. But I see this kind of perpetual pattern of we'll then do another discovery and then we'll do some kind of audit and then we'll do some kind of planning and then we'll do some kind of and you can spend, I've seen organizations spend 9 months doing paperwork. Now, if you just simply close the door today and send everybody home, the work in process is not worth anything. Nobody's going to buy it for you unless you're in the business of creating intellectual property you can sell, which is not my consulting. There is no value until you ship. And yet that's the part that gets stuck. And often the other thing I see strongly are totally disempowered developers. They're just treated as a function, particularly offshoring. I had some of the best offshoring experiences, but they're rare. Like in other environments, I see 9 times out of 10, the offshore people are just things to shove requirements to, you know, and that's kind of the two major anti-patterns: doing everything but the value creation, and the actual people doing the value creation seeing them as just a resource. I see that over and over and over again, more so in the bigger environments than smaller ones.
That's really fascinating. And, you know, from a BA context, it's like, I feel like the BA part of me wants to put value on that documentation, right? And like the work and the thinking that goes into it. And also, like the whole point of analyzing requirements is so that they can be built, right? Not so that they can be documented. So
Can I respond to that? Sorry, before we move on.
Yeah, for sure.
Just so it comes across. As a BA, I'm not saying we shouldn't do the BA activity, but there's a difference between saying doing the high level roadmap 12 months out. So you may spend amount of time and then iterate it periodically, but the bulk of the value creation time is the lower level requirements, and really where you're spending most of the time should be within a 2-month or a 1-month window, because then there's less chance of it becoming like wasted or not used. So I just want to put that into context. I'm not anti-BA. I'm very pro-BA.
You're very pro-BA, yeah.
Yeah, it's when the proportions are not aligned with value.
Yeah.
Or it's that the focus isn't on de-risking the subsequent code. Like, I think like that's one of the framings I like to use, is that anything you're doing is de-risking delivery. So like if you're doing it, if you don't need to de-risk it yet, you don't need to do the work yet, but you should be focusing on de-risking the pathway so that then the code can be cut and the value can be shipped. But I totally agree with Frank that like not understanding that the value exists when you actually create the output is where people get wrong. But also there's the opposite, which is that we start with the tech and then try to build out to the business value so like that's the classic, like got a product, it's going to solve your problems, but we don't actually understand what problems and what are we solving and is it going to fit?
Right.
So like both directions are kind of the bad.
Hannah, still pretty consistently.
Yeah, but definitely I also see the one that Frank says, it's kind of like the both directions where you don't have that kind of clear, what are we trying to achieve, get everyone aligned, okay, cool, let's build the thing.
Yeah. Now you mentioned before, like we got on, about how you're often on a project to really turn it around. So when you're coming in to turn around something that's sort of either gone off track, or, you know, what are the challenges you see there? Is it just that lack of focus on the value, or are there other challenges that are pretty common across those projects?
Oh, Laura, this is the moment of truth time. I did a big stint in government, and I was on the various like tender frameworks for procurement, and I did a couple of dedicated come in. We've got a program that's either kind of like, you know, going to hit the ground or needs audit and compliance and stuff. And, you know, I had a service description, you know, project recovery, assessment and recovery, had a tool for basically analyzing all of that kind of stuff. I would say that's incredibly rare, and nobody wants to buy services to fix a failing product or project. Nobody wants to even admit their project is in trouble, and nobody advertises is in trouble. However, so indirectly, so from a marketing point of view, total and utter failure, don't build a business like that. However, what I would say is genuinely, when people are hiring a BA though, I've never walked into a situation where everything was all fine and didn't need fixing. It's just not either openly known or acknowledged or kind of like, you know, or comfortably spoken about. But you kind of get an idea about what's going on in the interview if they ask the right question. There's like, sometimes there's big landmines, sometimes there's little landmines, sometimes there's just uncomfortable. So I'd say as a BA, you're kind of like, you're always fixing stuff, but you kind of need to look for it and smell it, and often, but that's where the value, the real true value is. And sometimes it's not actually within the remit they're hiring. So they know they need a BA, they know they need some analysis skills, they've got a job description defined, but it may not be aligned with actually what the business really needs. And the person who knows that may be 3 hops up the food chain from the manager who's hiring you. I'm going to hand over to Hannah now to continue that thread.
No, I totally agree. Like, I don't think anyone's ever hired me to be like, come in and fix this thing that's broken. It's more like, cool, we need some help. Not really sure. What does that look like? And then you're kind of, part of the job is to be like, okay, cool. What I'm seeing is that this is working really well. I've got some challenges. Here's some options of what we can do, or like, and kind of servicing that stuff up. Like, I spend a lot of time talking about like, hey, there's this, look at this over here. And that being kind of part of the function. But yeah, I agree. Like, I don't think things going sideways is like sensitive. And like, oftentimes, like, part of the role is to be able to like help people talk about like what's going on so that you can just deal with it. And it's not that, like, I think people, particularly when it's getting like a little bit challenging, like blame, and there's lots of stuff going on for people, right? Like when things are going sideways. And so it's you got to be like really like lean in like a really empathetic way into an environment. Because like people always, like almost everyone, like I've met some crazies, but like almost everyone is doing the absolute best they can with the skills they have and the knowledge they have. Like everyone is trying, right? There is extremely few people who don't fit that category. And like, so it's kind of like, you kind of want to take that attitude into any environment, because it's not that anyone's doing something wrong. Often the system themselves hasn't been set up to make them be as awesome. Like to Frank's point about the developers, oftentimes it's not that they're like doing the wrong thing or they want to do the wrong thing. It's that they're either not getting the right requirements, or there's like a miscommunication, or they need something different than what they're being delivered. Like that's why like I often like talking about systems, because it's the system that like engineers the result. And it's not really, it's people inside that system. And that's really complex, right? But it's really interesting when you can get it right and you can kind of like tune it in to being like, okay, cool. People have what they need to be as awesome as they want to be in this space. And that's for me success, I think.
Yeah, I think the message there for a business analyst who is more, maybe a consultant or full-time is like, what do you focus on in terms of the value add, right? Is it the problems or is it the role? And kind of what I'm here, I'm kind of surprised about this, that as you're talking about it, it's like you're using the role as the gateway to solve the true problem, versus like starting with the conversation about the problem and showing how the role can fix that. Am I kind of understanding the perspectives? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, so there is scenarios where just doing the role is solving the problem, right? And so therefore you just do that. I guess we're talking about when things are going a little bit more sideways, where it's not, you can't just go in and be like, cool, I'm going to solve this by really nailing what the business need is here and communicating that to the development team, right? Like that's not often the solve. The solve is often like alignment between business units, or some technical complexities that's not understood on the business side. So therefore the expectations are mismatched. Like, like it's more often that, and you need to solve that in order to be able to then be like, and now I'm going to write the requirement and then someone can ship it.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Actually,
sorry, go ahead, Frank. And then I was just going to highlight Gordon was excellent point. I think the BA needs to be able to translate between the various groups, which is part of what you were saying, Hannah. Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, I was going to say the context for a lot of my work, though, is in digital transformation. I mean, that whole kind of buzzword is starting to kind of mature, but still, it's basically organizations who don't have established development teams, or they're not in an industry that is like, okay, we're manufacturing cars, we've got all of our processes, we've got our compliance and governance. Like this is in like financial services industry particularly, where the regulation is around the kind of money handling, it's not around the development processes. So I'll come into an environment where the basic processes and understanding and capability and maturity is absent. So although it's like, we need someone to do the requirements, it's like, that's where I want to get to. But actually, you've got this huge backlog of stuff to put into place. Fundamental ideas about well, a Scrum Master is the same as a project manager. Well, maybe not. Depends on how pure you want to be with Scrum, or whether you just want Scrum to be an iterative waterfall. I don't really care. Like pros and cons. I'm not. But like there is an unpacking of the language. We do business requirements first, then we do the data requirements because they're traceable. Oh, what's traceability? Half the time they don't even ask what's traceability, and we just need this thing built. Okay, I'm trying to help you build the thing, but we've got to do. Often that whole infrastructure setup it's not consciously understood, so it doesn't come up in the interview. So you agree to the remit, and then there's this like 80% of other stuff you've got to do to then get to the starting line. And that is just part and parcel. So every second role I've done will be something like that. Is it dysfunctional? No, I wouldn't necessarily say that's dysfunctional. It's more like maturity level. We're down here. If you walk into some of them, high functioning, so if you've got like 50 developers already there and all the processes, you are just solving the complexity of perhaps the product you're designing and the user research, totally different. And that's cool as well.
Yeah, we have a follow-up question. We're going to move to successes here in a minute because I want to hear your success stories as well. Andrea asked, Frank, you had a comment about treating devs like resources. Can you expand on that? And what would a healthy BA dev working partnership look like? That's a great question.
Yeah, let me give an example. But recently, so a friend, like a lot of my peers are still writing software every day. And so he says to me, Frank, the agile coach has just imposed the definition of ready on us. Oh, okay, this is interesting. Anyway, it goes back and forward. And this guy's developed all of his life. So he sends me the definition of ready eventually, and I have a look. And, even he says it's fairly reasonable. And I'm looking at it thinking it's pretty good. But the thing is, the agile coach has imposed it onto the team of, say, let's call them 10, 20 developers. And so I go into LinkedIn and write some stuff about what do you make of definition ready? And a number of comments were, it's okay, but normally there's a bigger problem or there's a tip of the iceberg. And eventually talking with my friend and his setup, it turns out that there's an absence of product ownership. The product owner isn't hands-on, very busy doing some other project stuff. The developers are putting stuff into the backlog and prioritizing it on behalf of the product owner. And then the product owner is kind of not happy with the quality of it. So then they've instituted a gate and they've hired an agile coach to put the gate in there. And I said to him, look, it's probably all fine. You'll just get better quality stories. You won't get blocked in your work. You're just a contractor. Like, you don't have to get your back up. But my way would be to have the definition of ready over here. The developers don't know I've got that. We'd have a workshop or any number of workshops, and we say, hey guys, what's not working so well? Let's put it on a whiteboard. And if they come up with 5 of the 14 points, so that's cool, let's just try that. In 2 weeks' time, we'll see in the retrospective whether we need to do any more or change it. So I wouldn't have put it on them. I would have basically asked them, what do you need? And we probably would have got somewhere close. And I think that's the difference. Is, I want happy developers because they're building the value, right? And why should I tell them, even though I was an ex-developer, why should I be telling them how to do their job? Implicitly or explicitly. Like, I want them to do their job and to make me redundant, ideally. Closer we can get to that, the better. Sorry.
Hannah, is there anything you'd add to that about just that working, strategies that you use? Because you're more on the business side, right? So of building.
No, I mostly choose tech, because I have a fondness for the technical complexities of, gotcha. I've deliberately chosen to be buy the code, stay with the code, because I think that's where the fun is in my mind. So my favorite, and a couple of names just popped into my brain of the people I've really loved working with, and they were just super collaborative. It wasn't this there was no handoff. I got a thing to a point where we could solve a thing together. And so then we had the maximum room for this smart dev to come in and to solve it in the best possible way and to really, really solve the need, but not necessarily like meet the specs, because we'd build the specs together. We're like creating so super collaborative and super creative. And those were by far my favorite dev BA master teams, because it should be like that. That's the most healthy, I think, as opposed to kind of like this handoff. Because as soon as you get this kind of adversity or like adversarial kind of situation, you're not going to get the most out of people at that point. Whereas if you can have just free-flowing conversation, as long as, I mean, obviously you need the rigor of potentially requirements and or needs and or traceability, whatever around the edges, but that's just admin. Getting the value from the business need to shipping the thing is where the magic happens.
It does feel like magic sometimes, doesn't it? Like,
yeah.
I've just been working on, I know I've been talking about this book for ages, but like the chapter on scope and realizing like the magic that goes into figuring out the scope when you are truly collaborating and trying to figure out the business objectives and the whole business environment, along with true technical constraints and opportunities and tools that, you know, like, it's not like this structured 1, 2, 3 process. It's like, it's this messy sort of iterative piece. And like, I liked how you're like, and all of a sudden something comes out where it's like ready to move forward. It's like, there's like a touchstone there, right? Where it's like, okay, it all makes sense now. All the perspectives are blended. And like through my analysis lens, it also makes sense. Like, I've kind of fleshed out what I need to do as well.
Yeah, I was challenged recently by someone like who's stonkingly smart and made my like brain melt. And I've got some notes and I should write it up at some point. But he was talking about the nature of requirements, not just being like that by calling them needs, we're kind of lying about them, because there's so much constraints in there, and often the constraints themselves are from the technical solution. And it was like this kind of really fascinating thing where it made me really think about that it wasn't just from business side coming into the delivery teams. There's also like stuff from the tech in and of itself that's constraining what's next. And they like, it's not as simple as just this linear pathway. It's much more of like a collaboration, and like through that collaboration of like what's possible, what's feasible, what's viable, like all of that kind of good product stuff coming together to create the thing. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it is a little bit magic. So let's talk about successes. So when I, you know, like, just, I'm sure you all have tons of successes in your backgrounds, but is there a particular project that comes to mind, like, and what I guess even the definition of what success was on that project and what you felt like your contribution was to it, right? Like, what did you contribute as the BA or as in another role that really contributed to that success? So Hannah, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, it's funny that I don't really think of projects. I think of people. So like I posted about this the other day because it's definitely, I don't know whether it is just a me thing and maybe it's other people thing, but like I don't think about the project. I think about a specific person I work for. I really like working for a person. Like I search for like bosses that I'm like, cool, yeah, tell me what to do. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Like, how do I help you do what you want to do? Whether they're a product manager or a business person, like that changes the flavor, but ultimately I'm trying to help them. But success for me is kind of like is smaller than a project, because I think like as soon as we tie our own personal successes to a project, so much of that is out of our control, right? Like we can contribute, but we can't. So it's that classic thing of like a dev team should never choose a sprint goal that's reliant on other teams, because they don't like be aware of your realm of influence. So success for me is things like massive story mapping exercise, getting everyone on the same page and us all being really clear around what we're building and being able to prioritize, or facilitating conversations between like business and development to like make hard decisions around what's next. So like I think of key conversations or key workshops that like unlocked the ability to move forward, or the like that we started in a good place, or we built the right foundations. That's what I think of. And I think of the like specific people when I'm like, cool, I helped you solve your problem. Excellent. You're happy.
And create a momentum too. Sounds like a big part of it. Yeah. How about you, Frank? How do you think about that question? Feel free to reinterpret it in the way that works for you as well. Yeah.
I was just reflecting upon all the kind of various fruity kind of engagements, and I would say the success actually is, it's not that long ago we finished like rebuilding a kind of there's a trading platform with some savings products, US equities, UK equities. You know, it was quite boring. It's actually a boring example. You know, there was 3 teams of 10 developers, few BAs. It was like just a big corporate program. There for quite a while, pixel perfect design. So we kind of like weren't even collaborating as like cross-functional kind of Scrum teams. The reason why I think I'd hold that up is it looks boring, but I actually haven't come across that many well-functioning big enterprise programs. And there I spent the majority of my time looking at the pixel perfect wireframes, and working with the designers and tweaking individual words with the copywriter. You know, do we want this English version of it, or are we going to Americanize it? Do we want accents on the surname when they log in? Really boring stuff. But I would say it is quite exceptional because we spent 95% of our time talking about building the product rather than all of these other engagements where it's like 80% of the time is talking about how do we do requirements, how do we do this, how do we manage the stakeholders. So as a success, and I can't take credit for embedding that because 2 very good like account managers from suppliers and they had largely a well-functioning agile, and we used story points, you know, God forbid, but we had actual burn down charts. So they weren't perfect, but we just did iterative incremental improvements and we built the product, and there wasn't like unhappy politics and all this stuff. You know, all the usual stuff was there. It was just a relief to kind of like slot in and do the boring BA role. The other stuff's the interesting stuff, but that was just, you know, it's nice to see Scrum working, design working, product getting shipped, feature flags, mobile apps, you know.
And I feel like what you just described is what so many business analysts are like looking for, right? And I would really be interested to know in the comments, like, would you prefer to work in kind of that high functioning kind of team where like the roles are clear and everything's, or do you want some of these more problematic environments where there's bigger picture issues, right? So kind of in the comments, I'm really curious because I'm making an assumption there that most BAs are looking for that kind of team.
I think it's a fair assumption.
What's that?
I think it's a fair assumption, right? Like it's like when you're in that hum, that like, because I like when Frank was talking, I was like, yes, I've been in those teams, I know that thing, and I would agree. Like it immediately made me think of like 3 other like little projects. I was like, oh yeah, that I had that, and that was successful, because we were just high performing. I guess you don't remember when it's like just humming and churning as much as when it's like a bit harder.
I don't know, Hannah. Maybe it's just me. It could be just me, but I would say that project is 1 or 2 times out of 10. And let me give you another example. There was one project I had as a consultant. I was hired by a not Boston consulting, but by a Boston consulting firm. They had a work stream in the UK, and I turned up at this major bank, and there was literally police crime scene tape across the compliance officer's door on the trading floor, and we were brought in to fix this like major fraudulent issue that this bank had across their like global operations. And long story short, like, you know, went to America, and the principal of the firm took us out, and it's like he's talking about some restaurant or something and saying like, oh, I own the restaurant, and they can bring their own bottles of wine if they don't have to buy them all here. And somebody said something, and he says, oh yeah, that's because I own the off license just down the road, and I own the entire island. And then later on, when everybody got very drunk and I wasn't drunk, he says to me, you really have no idea, Frank. I said, what do you mean? He says, you really have no clue how business works. I said, why don't you tell me? And he says, well, the managing director of the bank is going to get promoted when we finished our work. I'm going to get £1 million, and you just need to tell me what's being said on the trading floor back into the Boston office so I can do my consulting job. And that's not an unusual experience. That's fairly extreme, but I've got a number of other ones on the CV, and I really do think that was just an average BA role advertised. So
I've
what
never
are
hung out
people
with a
actually
millennial on
walking
an
into?
island that he owns, so maybe I need different gigs.
Yeah, but
so are there things that, when you're interviewing for a position, this is, for both of you, that you're on the lookout for, or that would tell somebody whether this is a high functioning situation or a situation that maybe needs a little bit more help? Like, how do you ascertain that before you're actually in it? Because some people are truly unhappy, right, in one or the other. And there's kind of a mix. Like Naya says, I consider myself a fixer. High performing teams are boring. Adrian says both. I like to find environment after the chaos. And then Jeannie's more, I want all SMEs engaged up front, right? So like that's more of a high functioning team environment. So is there a way to kind of that you're feeling into that? Or is it really just an intuitive gut feeling after you've interviewed?
I'm not looking out for it because I'm not avoiding it. My process for choosing roles is entirely about the boss. The reason I think for me, I found if I can have a boss that I can trust, like genuinely trust, like we can have a completely trusted advisor relationship with, they know that I'm working for them. They can trust me with information. I'm their peep. That gives you like delegated mandate because you're working for someone and that person is an anchor into that org. And whether that's a product owner on like a little team, or whether that's like a product manager across multiple staff, or whether that's a like project manager or business stakeholder, like for me, it's about like no matter where you are in that, if it's like small or big, or like I was recently on an API team for like 6 months and that was like a blast. It was like little, and like my PO was like fab, like great PO, loved working with him, like would work again. But like it was, the reason I took that role was because of him. And then he was creating a thing. And because I knew that if I had trusted relationship with him, it didn't kind of matter what problems we had because we could solve them. And so like, yeah, I anchor myself to that. And therefore it doesn't quite matter what happens next because you've made your little team.
Yeah.
Does that even make sense when I said that out loud? I don't think I've articulated that before to that degree.
I feel like it the very common thing you hear is people leave bosses, not companies, right? And so you're actually talking about the reverse. Like I choose based on bosses, not all the other things. Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense. Frank, how about you?
I sincerely tried for at least a decade to kind of work out the kind of rhyme and reason. And I remember going to counseling sessions, and the counselor, this was a workplace counselor, like saying to me, like, why didn't you ask them, what are the pain points? Poison chalice. This was her exact words. You should ask them in the interview where the poison chalice is, not if there is, where the. Tried all this. We had like decks and all this kind of stuff, but ultimately, I think I've come to the conclusion that as a contractor applying for an advertised job on a job board for a role of business analyst, you've lost the battle. You're like already part of the employment machine. Where I've had very good experiences where I've won tenders directly of frameworks and stuff like that. That's very hard. The reason why I chose to specialize in software requirements and throw away the kind of general consulting is I've got a hypothesis that by keeping 5% of the business analysis general knowledge and then specializing in that, maybe the sales process comes in at a different level with a different remit. That's the experiment. Haven't tested that out yet, but I think kind of applying for a BA role on a job board, you're kind of at the mercy of what the organization and the manager and all this stuff. It's very difficult to know. But then equally, if you're not afraid to be sincerely honest, I don't like the situation I'm in. We need to change something. Maybe this is not the company for me. Perhaps I want a different boss. Maybe there's a level of honesty where it doesn't really matter what you walk into. It's just a matter of how you respond. I also think that perhaps there's some truth there as well.
Yeah, which is a great segue to like the endings conversation that we wanted to bring forward, right? Like that the comfort or discomfort that we can face with endings, and how much, like, as a contractor or a consultant, you're going in almost planning for the end, not like ready for the end at any time, but thinking about the ending versus maybe a full-time perspective, wanting to continue on because there's like a sense of safety and security associated with that, or other needs being met by that project, right? And projects by definition are temporary. They're temporary endeavors to make a change, and then that change should continue to live on in an organization, but they can kind of take on lives of their own. So what I don't know what my specific question is here, except for Hannah, you had a great ending story, and I think that might be a great place if you're willing to share that, kind of to kind of get us into this conversation.
I feel like if you're a contractor or consultant, you're doing endings all the time, and it's not as easy as it looks on the outside, but it's definitely something you get better at with practice. Like, it is something like doing it, you kind of like, my partner will say that, like, my anxiety level, like, he's mapped it over the years, and he's like, yeah, this transition's you're doing better than last time, like, because I'd get like better at it every single time I kind of like went through an ending. But ending's super important, like being able to like know that when you're no longer adding the value that you should be as a consultant or a contractor, and that actually you should be handing over to, maybe you've trained someone up to take over their role, and maybe it's like in a good spot. Like, that's exactly when you should leave. You should make yourself redundant and kind of like move on to the thing that you can add value in. And I think that is the difference between the consulting contractor side of things versus the like permie, is that, like, you are trying to make yourself redundant, because that's the most value. You've propped something up, you've done some stuff, you've made a role for someone in there, and then you've kind of like exited stage left. I can't remember the exact story you wanted me to tell, so I just rambled at you. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. That was really good. I remember going into a mastermind, and it was like a 9-month mastermind, and around month 6, she started talking about, wrapping up. We're in the third and final phase, and she's like, it's a great time to just appreciate or to become aware of your relationship with endings. And I found myself sometimes like wanting to pull out and just like, oh, I'm going to like just disengage because it's almost over. Or like, I'm going to dive head in and get everything I can get out of this like last month or two of the container we have together, right? So like, there's different relationships I think we can all have with endings, and it does bring up a lot more of the emotional side of things often. And we might not even realize how that's infiltrating how we approach a project ending or a job ending or a contract ending, as an example.
Got to hold those things lightly. Like, as a contractor or consultant, you're often the last person to land and the first person to leave in anything, right? And that's kind of the nature. It's the nature of the gig. And in some respects, I like that. But there's a skill to leaving well, I think, because you don't want to leave because like you get really attached to the people. Man, I get attached to the people, and so you want to leave them not feeling like, oh, that person came in, did some stuff and left. You want them to feel like you did add value, and you want them to think that after you've left as well as when you were just there. Which is a juggle.
Frank, anything you'd like to add to this?
I mean, like, part of my professional training was as a counsellor, and I did spend hundreds of hours on a crisis helpline. And in that particular model, you're not seeing someone for 12 sessions. You're seeing them for one phone call in their absolute time of need. And so, counseling anyway has a very good focus on ending. It ties in with the cycle of life. Like, we're all going to have an ending. Who knows what happens next? But specifically the phone call as well. Like, you have to manage the hour and a half phone call, like, because you really are leaving the person. So endings are super important. I think probably, unless you're like working in some kind of mechanized factory or process and you're happy within that, everyone disgruntled out there, permanent employee, contractor, consultant, first thing I'd say is, like, straight out of the consultant's book, is you need enough financial reserves to be able to walk away from any client at any point in time and be unemployed. And I'd say if you're unhappy in a BA team, regardless of your employment status, you've got to get to a point where you can just literally not turn up tomorrow and not be living in a cardboard box. That's the first thing you have to do. The other thing is, if you're a consultant and this is the nature of the game, shouldn't be charging the same rate as what someone on a salary position is getting, because you can't financially get ahead to create that. So you need the ability to basically have an ending. We know endings are missing from kind of like corporate vernacular. People don't like talking about them, but it is like super important to manage the kind of like, client towards an ending, and to have that out there, because it is part of the value. Like, but more recently, what I've found is, when your consulting is valuable, there's a dependence, and there's times where I've actually used the implied or explicit threat or the offer. Look, I'm not a good fit. Shall we hire a replacement for me? Oh no, you can't go now. Well, then we need to make some changes. As hard as it may seem, if you want me to stay, we need to make some changes. Now, it's lucky that basically, for some strange reason, I always want the best for the end client. We may not agree how to get there. It'd be a bit dangerous if I was kind of rogue, but I'm not. But that leverage is that, there are a number of times where I've literally had to call their bluff. This is going to be the end today. I'm not coming back tomorrow unless we make some drastic changes. There's been 9 months worth of lead up, but I'm looking at it and thinking, you've paid me daily rate for 9 months. You haven't got the value. We make this one intervention and you get 100-fold value off my daily rate. Like, that's why we've come here to reorganize your business. And we've kind of got to this point where we did the intervention. Sometimes it may take a couple of times, but you can use the ending as leverage. And at times where I've had, it's been hugely powerful. And those are the clients you stay in touch with for the next 10 years, even though you may never work together again. You're going to have lunch with them, because that is the moment. And I find in a lot of the non-traditional kind of situations that aren't as they're advertised, if it's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, there usually is this point where you say, this is where I earn my entire contract's worth of value by doing the thing that they haven't asked for, but in their stomach, they feel sick and they know they need it. And that's why we're here. And endings are part of that, because you're not part of the furniture. And making the intervention can't be part of the furniture. And if they could make the intervention themselves, they wouldn't hire an external consultant. Like, it's just part and parcel of the game. It's uncomfortable and really exhilarating, worthwhile, fearful, like, the whole gamut of emotions.
And what I love about what both of you shared is, like, I think there, especially in a career job context, there's this association of endings and failure, right? And it doesn't have to be a fail, it's a total reframe of, like, it's not a good fit, it's my time to go, or I've created a great success and now I'm on to the next thing. So, like, a reframe for anybody who's in a transition from a job. I really resonated with what you said, Frank. When I left corporate, it was because I had been building the savings account, and it was just such a toxic situation. And I was like, why? I have this. What have I been building this for? I'm like, this is the perfect time to lean into it, and give myself the freedom of choice in terms of what's next. And I was so broken, though, at that point, that I couldn't have been out interviewing. Right.
Yeah.
Like, I knew, like, if I went to interview, I was just going to, like, devolve into some sort of, like, complaint about my current situation. And that wasn't going to lead me to where I wanted to go. And so there is that gift of space, that some financial stability.
Finding a place that's right for you is, like, I think we don't talk, because everyone's different, right? Like, and even in the comments where I was like, I assume that people want to work in a high function. People are like, no, I don't want that. I want to be, like, in the problem space. Like, finding the spot that you can help in and that's good for you. There was a comment on one of my posts recently, I think from, like, Jasmine or something, who said, like, oh no, you shouldn't stay because you're stopping that person from finding their perfect BA. And I was like, oh my God, I love that concept of, like, that not only is it not right for you, but it's actually not right for them, because they need something slightly different. And maybe it's just, like, a little bit different. Maybe it's a lot different, but helping them find that, like, work that out, or like, fix their system sometimes leaving is the right thing, right? Like, and it's good. And I personally really like being on the side where I'm in charge of my contract and there's a time scale to it, because it means that we can have that conversation. We can talk about, is this working for you? Is it working for me? What could be better? What should we change? Like, it's almost enforcing like a retrospective or interest, like investigating your own continuous improvement of your employment relationship. And that's really powerful, like really, really powerful.
Yeah. So like clear boundaries, clear statements of work, clear agreements, so key in so much of what we do. Yeah. All right. So, go ahead, Frank. Yeah.
Yeah. And that point, I would say it's also kind of why, I often question like whether I actually am a BA or what a BA is, only because like I've read the BA book, 570 pages of the whole top to bottom of all.
570 times there for a second. Sorry, I was like, whoa. No, go ahead.
I've done my BA training. I've done all the roles, but like, I'm not sure I'm a good generalist BA, because I've worked with really good generalist BA who will basically kind of take that and work with the stakeholders and mold this stuff. I feel like a one-trick pony, which is if you've got a developer sitting there and you've got to build a product, I can kind of pick and choose this stuff and get the product out the door and kind of I can do all of the process stuff, waterfall, scrum, agile, you call it whatever you want, throw the term away. We'll get the thing shipped. But it's not BA work as you might imagine it. And I think the times where I have walked away is generally when they need someone else. They need a different kind of BA using that kind of BA box stuff in the way that I've seen other BAs use it. But I just can't seem to go to endless stakeholder meetings to facilitate, and then 3 months have this thing where I think, man, how did you do that? Like, that's a work of genius. So it's, for me, endings is about a bad fit more than anything else. Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah. So final question, and let us know in the chat if you have any questions about kind of what we've been talking about today. I do see that there's quite a few questions about getting into business analysis, and I have a ton of resources on bridging the gap. I just feel like that maybe isn't, unless either of you have kind of the quick thing that you'd want to throw out, but kind of that might take us a bit off track of what we're here for today. But the question I wanted to really pick your brains on before we go is, as a consultant that has worked on all these different things, do you have a tried and true, quote unquote, best practice, like the thing you always do first, or the thing that always finds its way in? Or is it really more of a toolbox? So how do you think about your toolbox in that sense?
Do you want me to answer first?
For sure. You can go first. Yeah.
I was like literally embarrassed when I reread like Jeff Patton's user story mapping recently, because I was just like, oh my God, like I did not quite grok how much that has shaped my practice of like how I do work. So that's almost like my go-to in some way, shape or form. I am doing some form of user story mapping. And it might not look like user story mapping. It might have like what it looks like might be different, but the process and the practice is like, I have consistent success with that, of using that as a mechanism to get people on the same page so that we can move forward. That's maybe I'm a one-trick pony. Yeah. It's a great book. Highly recommend. Also very funny.
Awesome. It's a great takeaway. You, Frank?
I think my approach is just kind of hardwired into how I see the world, really, which is if I've got 5 developers, they need something to do. And so I'm like carrying this kind of anxiety about at some point they're going to run out of stuff, and there's nothing worse than people being bored. And if you're kind of helping with that, you kind of need to work backwards. And then as a system thinker, it's like I just draw pictures. It's like, here's a high level, here's the moving pieces. And all I'm going to do is basically cut it up into what's most valuable and then drill down into the detail. And if there's kind of this thing that needs to be de-risked here, I'll be doing the requirements to get the guys or girls onshore, offshore, whoever going, while I'm de-risking this kind of stuff. I'm just simply thinking about, how it's like painting a house, right? At the end of the day, I want the house to be a different color, and then I'm doing whatever's required to have the house a different color. Well, that's just shipping software. I think it's just like how I see the world, for better or worse.
Getting things done. Yes, I love it. We have a follow-up question for you, Hannah. And then I would like each of you to share like how you would best love or like to have people connect with you, and what kinds of things you like to talk to people about. Because I know that's, you both are active on LinkedIn because you like to have these conversations and be part of evolving things. But Julie's asking, what do you mean by user story mapping?
Okay, I need you to Google user story mapping, Jeff Patton. He's the guy who wrote the book, but he's actually got a ton of free resources on his website. I'm potentially like a Jeff Patton fan girl, like 100%. Like I'm hoping to do is like his product owner course later in the year because I'm worried that he's going to stop doing it, and he does some Australian ones. It's just Google it. It's really, really excellent. Highly recommend it as a practice and an approach.
Awesome. And how would you like to continue to, or do you want people to connect with you on LinkedIn? Are there other ways that they can keep in touch with what you do? Yeah.
LinkedIn. I've got a website, but mostly like that's where I'm on LinkedIn nattering at things, like talking about any and all BA related things, but mostly on the systems. This is why I got to know Frank. So like thinking about systems and how we can better deliver value inside complex environments, basically.
Yeah. And you also have a newsletter and publish a monthly blog, I believe. Yeah.
I force myself to write an article every month to kind of think through things. It's basically like, it's how I process stuff is by like kind of like this. If I'm writing it down, I have to think through it properly, because if I'm putting it out there, then you have to think through it, which is fun. So you're welcome to follow that. But that's on my website. But yeah, I'm natter a lot on LinkedIn is basically where I hang out.
Awesome. And how about you, Frank?
I do the same. Follow me or connect me on LinkedIn. I don't generally sell anything. I don't have anything to sell, but I just write personal experience. So I don't know, a third of it or half of it is probably software development, business analysis. I write about autism, particularly because of the high prevalence in tech and being late diagnosed. You may not even notice it in me, but it's there. I do a bit of counseling as well, so I write about that, and then I write about the intersection of all of that into workplace and dynamics. And you know what, if you had enough of what I'm writing about, just unfollow me and that's fine, or stay connected.
I love the detachment. That's like the consultant's like, if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for being here. This was a bit of a selfish conversation because I wanted to connect with you both as well about all the things, and really appreciate what you had to share. And as well, I would love anybody who's new to me and my work to follow me on LinkedIn, and you can check out our resources at bridgingthegap.com. It does have hyphens in it.
Thank you, Laura, so much for organizing this. Yeah, it's been really good.
This was fun.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And if you have questions for us as a follow-up, feel free to get in touch individually on our pages, and we'd love to connect with you. So thank you, Hannah. Absolutely. Thank you, Frank. And I am notoriously bad at ending conversations like this, so I will just call that. I've been like nervous about it since we talked about endings 20 minutes ago. Like, how will I actually end the live stream? Embrace. I guess we will just end the live stream. Yeah. Have a great time. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you all soon.
See you later.